Good morning and welcome to Vicky 3 Academy. I'm Walker and here we are discussing services today. So, services is one of these market goods that you have in here, but unlike some of the other ones like wood or tools, your government can never really purchase services, but that doesn't mean that it's unimportant. In fact, at the beginning of the game, I think that services is one of the most important things available to you as the government, simply because of who it's going to help you interact with. So, who is going to be purchasing services is why I think it's so important at the beginning of the game. It's going to be consumed by pops of wealth levels 10 to 99 to meet what is called a services need, and then 15 to 99 to meet free movement needs if they can't find other goods that help them meet free movement needs. Same with here for communication needs, if they have 20 to 99, again, if they don't have other things they can use to substitute in, and then services, similarly with fine art to sub back in. So what this should tell you by looking over this basket is that first, basically, peasants almost in every economy are not going to be purchasing services. So we can just like pop over here that there are going to be some of them who are going to be purchasing it because they are going to have just barely enough standard of living to want to purchase a little bit of service. But where is it? It's like way down here, right? 5.9% of expenditures. Very, very little. Whereas conversely, if you look at the wealthy characters like the aristocrats and whatnot, we're going to see considerably more here because they are going to have, there we go, considerably more, 17.9% expenditures on services. And it's because they're using services to pay for their needs in other categories beyond just services. So what this means is, at the beginning of the game, services are a great way to concentrate demand, especially amongst wealthy pops, on a specific good, which is why it's so easy to slap services on as a consumption tax, because this is almost exclusively going to be aimed at pops who have lots of money, and even the pops who have less money. Remember, like the peasant who we saw who was purchasing stuff. The peasant is paying 5 to 6% of their income. The aristocrat was paying 16% of their income. The capitalist, I imagine, is probably going to be paying a little bit more. Let's find out. 27% of their income. So the wealthier you are at the beginning of the game, the more services you're going to want to purchase, and the wealthier you are at the beginning of the game, chances are pretty good from at least the perspective of trying to optimize your control over your economy. The wealthier the pop is, the more they are your enemy. And so taxing services is a great way for you to get money. It's also very efficient in terms of its authority, and it's also concentrated in terms of its production, because almost all of your services, at least at the beginning of the game, are going to be coming from your urban centers. So you're going to get some from your subsistence stuff, but you're going to get an awful lot of it from your urban centers. And of course, as you scale up in terms of de-peasantifying your nature, your nation, you are going to have less services floating around, right? Because they are coming from your subsistence farms. But because you're going to be building your peasants away and thereby increasing demand for the services, you're going to experience, as you industrialize, sort of this pinch on services, where your buy orders are going to rapidly start outtaking your sell orders, at least initially, which is why one of the very first things that I think that people should be doing when they're industrializing is going in and trying to find a way to add coal, gas streetlights to your urban centers, just so that there's more services in circulation, because you're almost always going to end up with a huge demand for services initially. But then, of course, as we mentioned, we've got like those different things that you can, the way you can meet those needs: services, free movement, communication, and art. And what that means is, as you move past early industrialization and just making sure that people have jobs in factories somewhere, and move into like big industrialization with transportation and tons of rail, that rail is going to gradually displace services in terms of the way that these two service needs are met. And then, of course, art is going to be a little tricky to balance, because art is going to be at 30 or above, and fine art is so efficient at meeting this need that if there's any fine art in circulation, your pops are going to go out of their way to pick that up instead of services. So what I'm trying to tell you is that We'll load another game. We'll load the America game just to see where our services are at. But generally speaking, as you begin your development, you're going to want to lean into services as a way to get extra money moving around in your economy. But eventually, and you're going to have to like keep track of this yourself, eventually you're going to end up with just a colossal glut in terms of your services, which you can maintain. You want to make sure people understand that just having a massive glut in services is not in and of itself necessarily a bad thing, because what it's going to do, of course, is it's going to allow our capitalists, our rich pops, good lord, there are an awful lot of them, these rich pops, they are still going to be purchasing services, of course, but because of the relative price coming down, their expenditures on services are not going to be as high, which means that by having a depressed service price, you actually indirectly buff all of the demand for everything else, because you're going to have to, as a rich pop, you're still going to have to meet these requirements for services, free movement, communication, and art. You're always going to need to meet those requirements as a rich pop. And so the pops will try to do whatever they can to purchase those things, but then they'll end up with a lot of extra money at the end, which will allow their standard of living to go up, and that will in turn cause them to be purchasing a lot of other stuff. And so when it comes to like, how do you deal with the price of services in your economy, it kind of depends on how much you care about growing the wealth and therefore the standard of living of your wealthy pops, because they are going to be the ones who ultimately are going to be responsible for purchasing most of your services. But if you can build like a pretty big and strong middle class, like for instance, if you happen to have communism, if you have like in here you have a council republic that switches everything over to ownership by the pops, by the workers. If you move into worker cooperative, you're going to dramatically increase the standard of living for your lower strata pops, because you're just going to be moving money from the upper strata pops down to the lower strata pops, which in turn is going to mean that this standard of living is going to jump up. And remember that whenever you increase in terms of your affluence, you are going to need more services, kind of no matter what you have in terms of substitution. And so by keeping the price of services down, you're not really hurting anybody except for the people who are working in the urban centers. If you want to remove those laborers from your urban centers because you need them for something, you can. But I think the easiest way to do that, of course, is substitution, right? Substitution here, this is a really strong automation technology. Same with this. These are both huge automation technologies if you want to reduce the number of pops in your urban centers. You can go down to unlit streetlights. I just, generally speaking, I would not recommend it for it, because I think that, typically speaking, having inexpensive services, it's almost never a bad thing, but unfortunately, it does reduce the amount of money that you can get from services. It's still going to be huge, though. It's still going to be huge, simply because it is a concentrated demand, right? It's something that everyone's going to be wanting to get a little bit of. And so that I think is like the broad thing I want to say about services. It is true empirically that you are going to end up with just a colossal glut of services towards the end, and then it just kind of depends on whether or not that's a problem for you. I think that that's mostly a feature and not a bug, because it means that your pops can buy other things. But if you don't have other things to sell to them, then obviously like you might need to cut back on your production of services. That's just up to you and your way to figure out your economy. I think the most interesting thing about services, of course, is that they cannot be bought or sold via trade routes, and so that gives you a lot more control over the supply that you have access to, because you can't worry about the AI messing you up. All right, that's Walker, and that is services. Take care.